Ladies and gentlemen, there's a moment in every connection where silence speaks louder than any text, call, or confrontation. Not the kind of silence that comes from anger or emotional shutdown, but the kind that comes from self-respect. The kind of silence that says, I'm no longer available for half-effort love. You see, when you go quiet, truly quiet, not to manipulate, but to reconnect with your peace, something incredible starts to happen. At first, he doesn't notice. Day 1, maybe day 2, he assumes you're just upset. He shrugs it off. She always does. But by day 3 or 4, he starts to notice the silence isn't random. It has a rhythm, a weight, a presence. Suddenly, your absence becomes more powerful than your presence ever was. He starts wondering, why is she done with me? Why is she talking to someone else? Did she finally get tired of my games? By day 5 or 6, he's checking your socials, replaying old messages, searching for signs that you're still emotionally there. Day 7, now he's spiraling. The same man who once took you for granted is now wondering what went wrong, and more importantly, how to get back in. Because here's the truth, silence is often misunderstood. We're taught to speak up, to explain ourselves, to fix things with words, especially in relationships. But there comes a point where talking more doesn't bring you closer, it only drains you. That's when silence becomes not just a reaction, but a powerful choice. When you go silent, you're not being petty, you're not ghosting or playing games. You're shifting the dynamic. You're saying, I don't need to argue to prove my value. I've already shown up. Now I step back. This kind of silence isn't cold. It's rooted in emotional intelligence. It's choosing peace over chaos, self-respect over reactivity. It says, I know my worth, and I'm no longer available for inconsistent energy. Most people think silence is passive, but it's the opposite. It's active restraint. It's the decision to pull your energy back and allow someone else to feel the weight of your absence. Not because you want to hurt them, but because you want clarity for both of you. In a dynamic where you're always the one reaching out, explaining yourself, initiating connection, your words start to lose meaning. Constant availability becomes expected. It becomes background noise. But when you go quiet, suddenly your absence becomes louder than anything you've ever said. This is especially powerful with men. Many men aren't wired to process emotions in real time through conversation. They reflect in solitude. They notice in distance. Silence gives them that space, and, for the first time, they feel the gap you always tried to bridge. When you're silent, you're creating space for him to wonder, to reflect, to realize. And in that space, he finally has to ask himself the questions you've been silently screaming through every word. Do I value her? Do I miss her? Was I showing up the way she deserved? He can't ignore that silence. Not when it lasts. Not when it's steady. Not when it's peaceful. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just there, or rather, not there. And for you, that silence is where your power returns. You're no longer chasing clarity from someone who won't give it. You're no longer pouring into a space that doesn't pour back. You're not using words to convince someone to care. You're letting your absence speak the truth. That kind of silence doesn't scream. It whispers with confidence. It shows you're no longer trying to be chosen. You've chosen yourself. And when you do that, when you sit in your silence with peace rather than panic, everything changes. Men process emotional distance differently than women. While many women experience silence as anxiety or rejection, men often interpret it as space, at least at first. That's where the shift begins, and it's why going silent can trigger a completely different reaction in his mind than what you may expect. In the early stages of going quiet, a man might not immediately panic. He may not overthink it. That doesn't mean he doesn't care. It means his emotional wiring leans toward compartmentalization. He puts things in boxes: work, relationships, emotions. So when a woman pulls back or stops reaching out, his first instinct isn't always fear. It's often curiosity, then dismissal. She's probably just upset. She'll reach out. He assumes things will go back to normal. But that's only the surface. As the silence continues, it starts to interrupt his emotional rhythm, because men aren't typically taught to sit with emotional discomfort or engage in deep processing in real time. They need space and solitude to connect dots. Silence creates that space. It forces a pause, and that pause eventually becomes unsettling. It's not immediate. It creeps in slowly. One day he realizes he hasn't heard from you. A few more days pass, and you're still not chasing. That's when the gap starts to feel real. And realness triggers reflection. Men may not talk about it openly, but when they start to feel a woman's emotional absence, their thoughts spiral internally. They go from "she's just quiet" to "why isn't she reaching out?" to "did I do something? Did I mess this up?" They feel the shift not because of what you're doing, but because of what you're not doing. You're no longer keeping the connection alive. You're no longer softening the space with check-ins, affection, or effort. And the silence starts to echo. That's when the power of your silence truly sets in, not as punishment, but as a mirror. It reflects his behavior back to him without you having to say a single word. He starts to realize you're not just quiet, you're done filling the emotional gaps. Because in that silence, he's left with one voice, his own. There's no distraction, no reassurance from your end, just his thoughts, his doubts, and his own awareness. He has to confront what your presence once meant and how much he's taken it for granted. And men don't always admit that out loud, but they feel it deeply. This is why silence works differently on men. While women may feel it immediately and emotionally, men feel it gradually, but profoundly. The absence becomes more intimate than presence ever was, because it creates a vacuum. And in that vacuum, he either steps up or stays gone. But the clarity it gives you is just as important, because how a man reacts to silence tells you everything you need to know, not in words, but in actions. Does he come closer? Does he reflect and change? Or does he stay where he is, hoping you'll come back to do the emotional work for him again? Silence draws out truth in a way that conversation can't. It's not about being cold. It's about giving both of you the chance to feel what the relationship really is when the performance ends and the space begins. The first few days of silence don't usually shake him. In fact, during day 1 to day 3, most men interpret your silence as a temporary mood, not a conscious shift. He assumes you're upset, emotional, or just taking a break, and he expects that, like before, you'll eventually reach back out. This is especially true if you've been the one to maintain the connection, initiate conversations, and keep things emotionally warm between you. To him, this isn't silence with meaning, it's just part of the cycle. Maybe there was tension, maybe something went unsaid, but he's not truly worried yet. He believes the silence is temporary. It doesn't yet feel like loss, it feels like a pause. That's how many men cope. They delay emotional response until something disrupts their pattern enough to wake them up. During these early days, he might even test the waters without fully reaching out. He might post something to see if you'll respond. He might check your stories. He may even leave things on read, believing you're the one who'll break the ice again. It's a subtle arrogance born out of comfort. He's gotten used to your emotional presence always being there, always showing up. What he doesn't realize yet is that your silence is intentional this time. It's not about being petty, and it's not about sulking. It's about withdrawing your energy to see what he does when you stop carrying the connection. That realization doesn't land in his mind during the first few days. Early on, he still believes you're in the background somewhere, feeling, waiting, holding space. He might think you're just being difficult on your feelings, or trying to make a point. In fact, many men brush it off completely in the beginning. It doesn't immediately occur to him that you're detaching, because detachment doesn't look like yelling or crying or fighting. It looks like stillness. It looks like peace. And that's what makes it confusing. That peaceful silence doesn't scream like anger does. It doesn't throw blame or demand answers. It simply stops engaging. And men are used to emotional energy showing up loudly. They recognize drama, not quiet disconnection. So at first, he assumes this is temporary. It's not a threat to him yet. He doesn't feel the absence fully, only the change in tone. And if you've always been the one to fix things, the one to close the gap, then he expects you to keep playing that role. But day 1 to day 3, is when the stage is quietly being set. It's when the silence begins planting seeds. He doesn't know it yet, but a shift is already in motion. While he's dismissing your silence as moodiness or temporary space, something inside of him is already reacting to the unfamiliar. It's subtle at first. A question in the back of his mind. A moment of wondering why you're so calm, why you're not reacting, why you're not trying to fix what's broken. And that discomfort, small as it may be, is the beginning of the internal unraveling that silence creates, because silence isn't a loud departure. It's the quiet withdrawal of someone who's decided to stop proving themselves. And in the first few days, even though he doesn't fully realize it, he's already started to feel the difference between distance and detachment. By day 4 to day 6, something starts to shift in him. The silence that he initially brushed off as a passing mood now begins to take root. It lingers, it stretches into days, and the longer it lasts, the more he begins to feel its weight. This is the stage where doubt sets in, not panic, not regret just yet, but doubt. And that doubt starts to poke holes in the confidence he had just a few days before. Until now, he's operated under the assumption that you'll come back, that your silence is momentary, emotional, and ultimately something that will pass. But as time stretches on and you remain still, composed, and unavailable, he begins to notice something that unsettles him. The usual pattern is broken. You're not chasing, you're not checking in, you're not trying to fix the emotional distance. You're just quiet, and he can't read you anymore. At first, it confuses him. Then it starts to bother him. He begins to wonder things he never let himself think before. Maybe you really are done. Maybe someone else has your attention now. Maybe you've decided to finally give up on something that no longer gives you peace. These thoughts aren't loud, but they're persistent. They come in waves, especially during moments when he expects to hear from you and doesn't. That routine comfort of, she'll reach out, no longer feels guaranteed. He may even test the waters again, liking a post, sending a dry message, or casually trying to get your attention. But now, the silence isn't just about absence, it's about power. Your lack of reaction tells him that you're not just emotionally distant, you've emotionally stepped out. And that's when it starts to feel real to him. During these few days, men often experience a shift from assumption to uncertainty. He starts to go over previous conversations in his head. He replays moments where you seem disappointed, distant, or emotionally tired. He starts connecting dots he once ignored. This is where reflection truly begins. And it's uncomfortable for him because silence gives him nothing to push against. There's no fight to win, no drama to distract him, just stillness, and that stillness creates discomfort. This is also where pride and ego get challenged. If he's used to being the one in control, used to you doing the emotional labor, then this period of silence confronts that pattern. He realizes the attention he took for granted isn't there. He starts questioning if he misjudged your emotional resilience. If he thought you'd always be there, this is the moment he realizes maybe you won't. And it hits differently when that realization isn't triggered by a breakup speech or a dramatic scene, but by quiet, intentional distance. You see, men aren't always quick to react emotionally. They often need time for silence to stir discomfort deep enough that it pushes them into awareness. These middle days are where that internal shift begins, where your absence stops feeling like attitude and starts feeling like loss, where his confidence begins to erode and the questions become harder to ignore. In this stage, the silence that once felt ignorable now starts to echo. The doubt becomes a slow burn, and for the first time, he wonders, not if you're mad, but if you're done. By day 7 to day 10, the silence becomes impossible to ignore. What he once thought was temporary now begins to feel permanent, and that permanence triggers something he didn't expect: deep reflection. This is no longer about curiosity or casual doubt. Now he's replaying everything in his mind: the last text you sent, the tone in your voice, the way you were showing up emotionally before you pulled away. Every small moment that once felt insignificant is now magnified in his memory. Men don't typically arrive at emotional realization quickly. They don't often sit in reflection during the chaos. It's usually in the calm after the storm, when things go quiet, that their mind begins to sort through what they overlooked. That's exactly what happens during this period. In your silence, he starts listening to what he didn't hear before. Not because you said anything new, but because now there's no noise covering it up. He begins to realize that your silence isn't a tactic, it's a response. It's the result of repeated neglect, emotional imbalance, or not feeling chosen. And he knows, deep down, that you didn't just stop communicating, you stopped hoping. You stopped trying. That's what scares him the most. This is the phase where he begins to spiral, not always dramatically, but internally. He becomes hyper-aware of how much you were doing that he never appreciated. The check-ins, the emotional presence, the effort to understand him, to make things work. Now that it's gone, he realizes it wasn't just something you gave. It was a gift he assumed he'd always have. He may try to distract himself, go out more, bury himself in work, scroll through social media hoping to see signs that you're still around. But the void grows, and the longer you stay silent, the louder the consequences of his behavior become. He starts to feel regret, even if he can't name it yet. He thinks about the moments when you were vulnerable with him, when you asked for more, when you tried to express how you felt and he brushed it off or didn't meet you halfway. That memory now stings because he begins to see the pattern he denied before. The absence has now transformed into emotional pressure, and that pressure forces him to confront a possibility he never truly considered: you might not come back. That realization doesn't just hurt his ego, it pierces through to the part of him that still cared, even if he never showed it right. You see, men don't replay conversations when everything is fine. They replay them when silence makes them uncertain. That's when they go back and try to figure out where things shifted, where they went wrong, where they missed you, showing signs of emotional burnout. And by now, he understands something: this isn't about space. This is about you being gone in a way that feels unfamiliar, not dramatic, not angry, just done. The very energy he once took for granted has disappeared, and now he's left with the echo of every moment he dismissed, every message he responded to late, every effort he met with indifference. He realizes you weren't just being emotional or too sensitive, you were trying, and he wasn't. In this period, your silence turns into a mirror, one that reflects not just your value, but his failure to see it when he had the chance. When you pull your energy back and go silent, you shift from being someone who's always available to someone who is suddenly missed. And that shift is what brings clarity, not just for him, but for you. In those quiet days when you're not chasing, not fixing, not trying to keep things alive, something powerful happens. You begin to feel your own worth again, and he begins to feel what life is like without it. This is the moment where the entire dynamic starts to flip. You stop being the one hoping for a response, and you become the one who's being watched, remembered, and longed for. You become the prize. Not because you're playing games, but because you finally let the relationship breathe without your effort holding it up. And when that happens, you create space. Space for him to choose you without pressure, without force, without emotional chasing. People don't value what they don't have to work for. And often, when someone is constantly receiving your energy, your love, attention, time, they stop seeing it as a privilege. It becomes routine. But silence breaks that routine. It interrupts the comfort of your presence. It makes him ask himself questions he wouldn't otherwise stop to consider. Was I showing up for her? Did I take her for granted? What does her silence mean? Has she moved on? And most importantly, what do I actually feel for her, now that I can't feel her? When you're always the one initiating, you're not giving him the opportunity to meet you halfway. You're giving him your energy without asking him to match it. But when you step back, when you stop giving and just observe, he either rises or disappears, and either outcome gives you your answer. That's the point. Silence doesn't just make you the prize, it reveals the truth. If he truly values you, he will feel the shift. He will sit with the discomfort of your absence and begin to act differently. He will come forward, not because you begged, but because he chose to. And that's the only kind of connection that lasts, one where you are chosen freely, not pursued because of pressure. If, on the other hand, he doesn't come forward, that tells you everything. It tells you that all your effort, all your emotional giving, was one-sided. And instead of holding on to false hope, you can let go with peace, knowing that your silence gave space for the truth to surface. That's what silence does. It stops the noise. It removes the performance. It takes away all the distractions and emotional fillers. And what's left is either a man who steps into his role or steps away from it. You don't need to yell. You don't need to explain your worth again and again. You don't need to break down just to be understood. Your absence will do the work for you. And if it doesn't, you now know it was never going to be real love anyway. By pulling back, you force emotional accountability. You stop rescuing him from discomfort, and you let him feel what he's avoided. And that discomfort is where real growth starts, where real connection forms, or where the illusion ends. But no matter how he responds, one thing becomes clear: when you go silent, you're no longer chasing. You're standing still in your power and allowing him to decide, do I step up or do I lose her? And that choice is no longer yours to make. So, ladies and gentlemen, understand this. Your silence isn't weakness. It's not coldness. It's a conscious, empowered decision to stop pouring into someone who can't meet you at the same depth. When you go quiet, not out of spite, but out of self-respect, you shift everything. You stop being an option and start being a realization. You stop chasing clarity and let truth reveal itself. If he values you, he'll feel your absence like a storm. He'll step forward, not because you demanded it, but because the silence made him see what he was about to lose. And if he doesn't, then the silence gave you your answer and the peace to walk away with dignity. Sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all. Thank you.